Hello everyone, today is Friday the 1st of September 2017. It is block height 483,022. My name is Chris Ellis and today we come to you with some special guests. We have Shinobi.
Hello everybody.
We got Aknix.
Hey guys.
And we got Kyle Torpey, special guest.
Hey guys, what's up?
What's up? Yeah, so we did a competition maybe last week and we asked you do you know of any really good quality journalists? And there were a few answers we were going to accept, and somebody got the right answer and they received 0.03 Bitcoin. And one of the answers we were going to accept was Kyle Torpey, and guess what? Somebody came back at us with that answer. How do you feel, Kyle, about the idea that we had a list of journalists on the back end, but we were going to accept these good quality journalistic writers in the crypto space, and your name was on that list and somebody called you out by name? How do you feel about that?
That's pretty cool, but I don't think there's many good journalists to pick from in the space, really. I mean, I read Aaron's stuff too from Bitcoin Magazine, and Pete Rizzo and Stan Higgins at CoinDesk are pretty good. And Alyssa Hertig, I think is her last name. I'm probably forgetting a few, but there's not really too many to choose from.
No, there really isn't.
There's a lot of blog spam out there.
There isn't, but we wanted to highlight it, and that's actually kind of the raison d'etre of this channel, is to try and highlight those good quality people and to align the incentives in such a way that we want the truth more than we want the other stuff, the noise. So with that, I'm going to go straight into our first article, which is this one. Shinobi, you picked out. The SEC are hiring Ms. Bass as the top regulator of mutual funds and ETFs. And what was her story like before she got in here?
Well, she worked at Harlan Fisk, Stone Scholar out of London, Shearman and Sterling LLP, and then most recently at Ropes and Gray LLP. And that's the most interesting thing about this, I think. That is the company that consulted with the Winklevoss twins about the coin ETF. And she's actually going to be taking a position which is pretty much the division of the SEC that manages things like mutual funds and ETFs. And I just think this is a very interesting incestual undertone in the background. And there's been a few things like this if you kind of peel everything back and go back to the beginning of the Trump administration.
Wow, this is like Rumsfeld in the FDA, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the exact same kind of revolving door that we see in a lot of other industries. We've had Trump pick a treasurer, I believe, that is very pro-Bitcoin. We have had Peter Thiel on his transition team at the beginning of administration. His appointee to the SEC came in right after the coin ETF was denied, I think, roughly. And then that decision came back under review. Now we have an employee from the firm that was consulting with the Winklevoss on the ETF, taking over the division of the SEC that would make a decision relating to that. And it really makes me wonder, especially looking at Putin and the deal that was recently signed with Vitalik and the Russian bank and some of the dynamics going on in China, how much of a geopolitical undertone is there really driving some of the developments in this space? Because those strings are starting to kind of pop up and be visible in a lot of different places now.
So does this mean that the ETF by the Winklevosses is more likely to get through because of this appointment?
I mean, circumstantially, looking at all the things that have happened since it was first denied, I think that's a very decent possibility. It definitely has the look of maneuvering people that are more friendly to the idea into positions that would be relevant to making the decision.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, how many pro blockchain people are in the SEC now?
Well, with the appointee to head the SEC by Trump, and I'm going to assume, it's making an assumption here, that Ms. Dalia is also pro. She was working for a law firm that was advising how to structure a crypto ETF. But I think it's more not just the SEC, but the government at large. There just seems to be a lot of different bureaucratic officials and advisors that are starting to be a little more vocal about wanting to see where this technology goes. Take a little more hands-off approach in terms of regulation. And I think you could really look at this as the first signs of governments starting to realize what exactly they're dealing with. That they can't just stamp their foot down and make the bad thing go away. They have to find some other way to adapt and deal with it.
I think some of the new ETF proposals are based on derivatives too. After was Ledger X got permission from the CFTC to build a Bitcoin-based derivatives platform. So I don't know if it'd be easier to get approval for those. I forget which entities are behind them.
I actually talked about that the other day. The Rex ETF was planning on solely getting exposure through derivatives products, and they were actually planning on setting up a subsidiary in the Cayman Islands and taking, I think, a quarter of the entire firm's assets and transferring control there so that they could invest in like higher leverage products or swap contracts and things that the SEC regs wouldn't let the firm itself invest in directly.
Were you guys watching CNN today?
Sadly, no. I try to avoid the mainstream news as much as possible.
I'm sorry, CNBC. I confuse my mainstream media outlets, sorry, all the time. But I watched this interview as it was being tweeted. Citron Research slams the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust and basically saying he's going to short it. I think a lot of people in the comments confused the actual trust with Bitcoin. I don't think this chap was saying that he was going to short Bitcoin. He was just saying he was going to short the trust. And the reasons he cited was that, you know, how far away that the actual share price is right now away from the actual Bitcoin's underlying value. It's like 100%, you know, valued higher than what Bitcoin's price is. And he also cited, quite interestingly, the fact that they weren't going to hand out the Bcash tokens, which I thought was interesting. And there was also some concerns about the security, like what if they lose the Bitcoins? And that's actually like a legitimate concern. If you think about it, when you buy a derivative, you're basically back to the custodian model that you used to have with traditional finance. So I'm not really sure what the value is in a lot of these products. Because imagine if everyone were to pile into crypto the same way they did the dot-com bubble, the same way they did with housing that came after that one, right? Is that then the economy ends up being too centralized over one financial vehicle. And then if that financial vehicle blows up because of some pick an externality, then we're just going to end up repeating the cycle.
Well, yeah, I mean, as far as the Bcash goes with Grayscale, I believe what their plan was to pretty much take it all and sell it on the market and distribute the proceeds among shareholders, kind of like a dividend payout. Mm-hmm. But as far as security, I mean, I don't really see any security risks that would be represented by a model like Grayscale, because they essentially hold all the coins themselves, and it's not actually redeemable. You're essentially just buying shares in that company that is itself holding coins. So there's no real exposure there for them. They can just keep everything in cold storage and just have what you need to be publicly auditable, and that the private keys never need to touch anything that could present any kind of security risk.
Yeah,
so
I mean, I hope they are doing that. I hope that they are keeping it in physically. I mean, I trust that they are. But I don't know if I thought we were trying to get around that trust. But it's a question of degrees. I see a place for it. I see, you know, lots of normies are not going to want to secure their own private keys. That's kind of alien and anathema to them. So,
well, yeah, I mean, one of the biggest problems in this space is it's not the block size, it's not transaction fees, it's keeping your keys safe. And even like the most user-friendly things like a Trezor or a Ledger or a Keep Key, the hardware wallets, still in itself like presents a pretty big security risk for non-technical people. Like if you just have somebody backing up their word seed not using an extra passphrase, not scrambling that backup, well, that backup is the exact same kind of security risk as having your phone potentially compromised. If somebody gets that seed and you don't have those extra layers because you're just doing what the instructions say, that seed's lost, your coins are gone. And I mean, like, even the best option we have to point people at still has huge downsides. And until we really solve that fundamental problem, there's going to be a lot of demand for products that take that custodial risk for people. Like, despite the entire central tenet of cryptocurrencies being control things yourself.
Plus, another benefit of SegWit too that no one really talks about is now we can add that covenants proposal where you basically have 24 hours to revoke a transaction on the network in an effort to allow people to better protect their private keys. But I think it also requires that MAST proposal from Johnson Lau first to be able to be implemented into Bitcoin. I can't remember.
Yeah, I do think it does, but yeah, and features like that are important to play with. I mean, it obviously comes with a fungibility trade-off, because obviously now you have that window in which you could pull back a payment if you were spending directly out of that. But that's a very valuable feature, ignoring that, for people who aren't technically competent enough to really manage their own keys. And especially with the potential to roll things out and test them on side chains. And I also believe Johnson is trying to roll out MAST as soon as he can on Litecoin to get things rolling and test it out. But yeah, there's a lot more that needs to be figured out than just bump the block size up, keep fees low.
That's the kind of detail to attention that I like on this channel. So we're going to go now, I guess, the easy segue, really, sticking on this theme of the SEC. So this article written by this guy called Torpey, I don't know who this guy is, but he's basically done an article which is like a really good exposition of Epicenter podcast episode about this chap called Morgan. Who is Nick Morgan, Kyle? And what the hell, what is he talking about?
So Nick Morgan used to be a enforcement attorney at the SEC. So he would deal with the sorts of cases that we're now potentially seeing with the ICO market. And to be honest, he threw out a lot of mixed signals in his appearance on the show. He talked about how, like, it was wide ranging, because he went from, like, you could apply securities law to everything, including Ethereum itself, potentially, from the way it was structured, to basically the key point is that it depends on what the SEC decides which cases they actually decide to choose to go after. So there are he laid out like certain types of situations where that the SEC will focus on just to make sure that they are efficient with the limited resources that they have. And at first he talked about like the obvious cases of fraud where they know that people are actually being hurt by these ICOs, possibly through fraudulent claims, and then like people saying they'll do one thing with the money and then doing something else. And I think in the podcast someone even brought up the case of Josh Garza and Paycoin, where it was like an obvious case where it was a fraudulent situation, so the SEC went after them. But when it comes to more just like issuing a security on Ethereum, and even if you do everything right and you try to do everything the right way, they could still come after you. And basically, in that case, they would seize potentially all of the funds that you raised, and also give you another fine on top of that, perhaps similar to what we saw with Eric Voorhees back in the day with Satoshi Dice. But yeah, it was overall very interesting podcast, not just the points that I brought out, and anyone that's interested in how the SEC is looking at these sort of digital assets should give it a listen.
Yeah, I found your article actually Really good. I thought that I could either watch the video and spend that time, or I could just go through. You picked out some really good quotes. And I think this is a great backlink, by the way, for Epicenter, who I'm really glad right now that what's happening is that more of the media inside of crypto is now getting a platform on sites like Forbes. I think it's good that they're putting in the effort to actually, use, proper journalists who verify their facts, go out, quote people, link back to the original source, which you don't really see, I'm afraid, in a lot of the mainstream press. So I like that they're listening more to what's going on inside of the community, and rather than trying to insource it, they're actually trying to take, talent from that profession who know about all of these details.
Yeah, I forgot to mention too that one of the key points that he made was the SEC kind of using the exchanges as a way to like outsource a lot of the work they have to do. So basically, if they tell the exchanges that if they list securities, that unregistered securities that are based on Ethereum, that they'll go after them, then the exchanges are going to respond to that by doing their due diligence and making sure none of the assets that they're listing are breaking the law or breaking regulations related to that. And we've already seen like Shapeshift and others come out and say that they're doing like a review of all their tokens, and they'll probably decide to take a few down if they feel like the SEC might target them as a result of it.
What do you think Bittrex are going to do? I think Bittrex are going to relook at
I actually reached out to them right after the original SEC report came out, and they basically just said that they've always done their due diligence, that they've always been making sure that they're only listing the best assets. So that was their response, at least. I don't think I ended up publishing that anywhere because I didn't have.
Well, there is a distinction that we've made before, obviously, between an ICO and an altcoin. I think is he saying that? Is Nick saying that essentially they're the same thing, or is he drawing that distinction?
I don't think he drew that distinction. I think that, because that's what they always say, like the basic premise of everyone that's trying to get around these regulations is they're saying that there's some kind of use to the token, so it's not like an expectation of profit or something like that. But in reality, I mean, no one would participate in ICO unless they did have an expectation of profit. So it's very contradictory on face value, and they can make all these claims about, like, I think EOS is like a really good example where they tried to put it in their terms that actually Ethereum did this too, where they said like the token has no value, it may never be used. Like they tried to like word their way around the regulations, but that's not how it works. Like terms and conditions, but then the only thing that matters is what people's expectations are and stuff like that. So like if people are investing because they think they're going to make money, it doesn't matter if how what you said in the terms and conditions.
Yeah, exactly. You want to say one thing with one mouth, another thing with another. You want to say one thing in your marketing literature, another with your legalese, and that's not okay, because you're basically just trying to have your cake and eat it as a company. And you brought up a really good point about deputization. So a lot of the ways regulators are able to enforce their laws is just by getting businesses to do it for them, because the business have to register somewhere. The whole point of a business, you advertise because you want people to know who you are. You want to be addressable as an entity, and that makes you addressable by everyone, including government. And the second point you pulled up was an interesting one, which I don't think a lot of people realize or even think about, is that you can be perfectly well-intentioned and still commit fraud, even if it's fraud by negligence rather than with a forethought and intent, something where you deliberately set out to deprive someone of money. Sometimes, people just go into business naively and they don't appreciate all the accounting that has to be done, all of the internal processes they need, never mind the external needs they have to third-party auditors. But I think that there's been many cases in crypto's history where people have gone out and they've got a purpose and they really wanted to change the world. But then maybe they didn't, circumstances changed. They didn't do the things they said they were going to do with their money. And then a lot of people have had their expectations, screwed up and messed around with, which, generally people don't like. Shinobi, do you have any thoughts?
Another thing too is that if I could just add one more thing.
Yeah, please.
Especially in the crypto space, it's always really difficult to pick out the difference between just a bad idea and a scam. It's like, because once they collect all this money, how is they're like, they could be like in the other side of the world, and there's no really much of a regulatory action you can take against them.
Yeah.
So, and like, no matter if they had good intentions or not, the end result is that you're out of your money and spend it on whatever. So it's I think the SEC might have to figure out a way to pick out the differences between scams and projects that are just bad ideas.
The SEC should think about
well, I mean,
they should think about investing, surely.
I kind of wanted to jump in real quick, but see, that's kind of like a really gray no man's land. Like, what is like the difference ultimately? Like, if you look at Bitcoin itself, Satoshi's original idea before he ended up implementing the 1 megabyte block size and kind of just spending more time mulling over possibilities of how to scale things, his plan was, we'll just have fraud proofs. And we can centralize nodes and miners, and all the light clients will just have this cryptographic proof that nothing is going wrong. And that was his plan, but that is not possible right now. Like, I don't think he really appreciated the complexity of setting up a system like that cryptographically. I mean, it's like, if you have a group of things, you can prove that something is in that group. But how do you prove something is not in that group? And I don't think Satoshi was a scammer. Like, I don't think Bitcoin was set up to be a Ponzi scheme just for him to profit off of. But his expectations of how to scale the system were just based on a completely flawed idea. So it really is a very nuanced idea. Like, what is the difference between just getting in over your head and outright trying to scam people? That is such a difficult area to kind of pull apart and tell the difference of. Like, you could make the argument that Satoshi himself tried to scam people if you look at things the wrong way without context.
Mm-hmm. Are we ready to move on? Aknix, don't say no. Have you got something to say? Don't say no. He's not going to say anything. Classic. I think we should. I think the SEC should go into.
He's got to get his. He's got to get his apocalypse RV ready. He'll have time.
Yeah, that is true. He is working on something very important. So I think they should go into investing. If they're doing all this job of like researching and the people behind, each and every project, that's pretty much what an investment firm does. So I think they should set up an investment arm to their business. Okay, are miners leaving money on the table? Is this a case of MLOT? Shinobi, next story. Bitcoin Cash, mining saga.
Well, this is kind of another nuanced topic that I love to talk about. The entire idea behind any proof of work system functioning is that the majority of participants are competing for their own self-interest, that they will act rationally in a way that most benefits them. Here with Bitcoin Cash, now that the profitability is lower and miners are actually intentionally trying to keep it that way, what looks like that's that assumption being wrong. But if you really peel back and look at things along a larger time scale, this actually is somewhat, in a way, a rational move, assuming that they really do think that Bcash has some long-term viability. Because they really fucked themselves with this emergency downward adjustment for the difficulty. Like, what this pretty much did, it created an incentive loop where after it's down to the point of profitability, obviously anybody's going to jump in and mine that because it's profitable. They can churn the blocks out really quickly, and then once it's not profitable anymore, they can pull back, sell it, and pocket the money. But this forces everything down. It forces the price down as they sell things, if they were to, and then it's just a feedback loop where you're hopping in, getting your profit, leaving because it's not profitable, letting things adjust downward, and then rinse and repeat. And this was having the effect that if things kept going that way consistently, they would hit their block halving sometime next year. And that would put them in the position where they would have to be twice the price that they would be previously in order to maintain profitability against Bitcoin. And that's a really dangerous position for them to be in, considering they have the same proof of work. And ultimately, their aims are, I assume, to incentivize miners to jump ship from Bitcoin proper to Bcash through profitability. And if that halving happens prematurely, that is really detrimental to that goal. So this kind of, it shows the complexity of these incentives and how they're not so quite black and white and simple as people think they are. And it also kind of highlights the way that miners are kind of a systemic risk at this point. I mean, this has shown that these two proofs of works existing next to each other, you have now separate subgroups attempting to ensure that the one they want to succeed is the one that's going to be profitable. And that warps the incentives for both systems. Now, instead of just the internal incentive structure of one proof of work system, do what the market demands for that, you have this kind of meta incentive structure involving both. And you can't really escape that unless one or the other ultimately fails. And this kind of shows that the miners behind Bcash, they're willing to take that short-term loss in that long-term kind of thinking. So, like, I don't think this situation is gonna go away anytime soon. It's not gonna just resolve itself like a lot of people think it is. It really is a longer-term thing that we just have to see how it plays out.
Do you speculatively, do you think people are still waiting for another pump on Bitcoin Cash before they kind of dump everything? Like, just the speculators. That's what I'm getting a sense on a lot of these chat rooms.
Definitely. I still haven't dumped a lot of my Bcash. I was pretty much waiting for another pump myself. I mean, if they're really trying to make it work long term, I mean, it's kind of inevitable, isn't it?
Yeah, because along with the mining, you know, we were talking about this on the chat room earlier, you've also got all the speculators and the market makers, and you can't have one without the other. They both kind of feed into one another. So you're going to have like this expectation in the market, I think, even as Bitcoin right now is touching, like, trying to go for 4,900. Everyone's kind of riding that 5,000 train right now. And what happens to the alts? We've seen a couple of the altcoins rise up. Even some of the really shittier shitcoins on Bittrex have done pretty well. But I think that Bcash is kind of sitting around. I think a lot of people, the reason they're not selling it down even further is because they see that horizontal support level and that it's like, I'm kind of expecting Roger and Co to give this one last push up before I sell out.
Well, there's also the point that the market cap is kind of like many of the altcoins where it's it's quite artificial, because, like, how many people don't even know they have Bitcoin Cash? How many Coinbase users wish they had access to it and could sell it? How many Zappo users wish that? So in a way, like, it's like free money because you're having a sort of artificial market cap propping up the price for the miners. But I mean, I think the news that has been coming out is that they've been mining at a loss now. Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, currently. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if they're doing that, then that gets into the argument, as Shinobi was saying, where, like, if miners are willing to mine at a loss for a long period of time, like, that's when you can start getting into the argument of, like, the basis of Bitcoin is kind of broken. So, like, if miners continually do that, then nodes can decide to hard fork to a new proof of work. But then there's the potential that, I mean, it's possible that the miners could then, it kind of sets a precedent which some would argue that it would be a great precedent to set one time this early in Bitcoin's history, where you hard fork the proof of work when the miners do anything remotely wrong. And then the precedent is set for the next group of miners with a different proof of work, where you say, or they know at least, that the full nodes aren't going to, and they'll change the proof of work if they have to.
Yeah, it's going to become an advanced persistent threat. And I predict, and I don't do predictions lightly, that 2018 will be the year of the fork, and we're going to see lots of forking. And this is just something that Bitcoin needs to get out of the way, and we all just need to get through this. We know it's coming, and we live through it, and everyone pumps and dumps these forks with the fork. I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner in Bitcoin's history, quite frankly, Carl. I'm amazed that it's taken them this long to figure it out. All right. And you can follow along with the stories, by the way, in the description, guys. You can see where we're at, coming up to our last story. Shinobi, tell me about these 3,000 Bitcoin miners that had their...
Sorry about
that. They were doxed on the network.
Kind of cut out for a second there. He's having some VPN trouble. Sorry, folks.
Were you using a VPN with YouTube?
Don't trust Google at all.
Yeah, he doesn't even dox himself when he's live on air with us. Well, let us know when you're ready, mate.
Yeah, we just touching on the security incident, I take it?
Correct.
All right, well, a Dutchman by the name of Victor Gevers was poking around looking for exposed ports and found roughly 3,000 miners open to the internet. And there's really a few interesting things about this. One, he was able to determine that they were script miners. I believe the Zeus miner, one of their models, based on the firmware information that connecting it was able to give him. As well, because of the IP ranges that they were in. If everybody doesn't know, pretty much IPs are set up in blocks and essentially sold to companies. And those are kind of divided into their own sub-networks called autonomous systems. And pretty much because of that, you can look at certain IPs and have a top-level idea of who owns those. And these were Chinese government IPs. So the implication to draw from that is that these miners are actually owned or at least sponsored by the Chinese government to some degree. And the last interesting thing is, poking around a little more, he saw that there were actually previous attempts to him finding these connections to infect these miners with malware. I assume to either redirect them to another pool or try in some way to divert the revenue from them to an address that they control. But this kind of, it shows a lot of different things. To call back to what I was saying earlier with the SEC, like how much geopolitical drive is there really in the background to a lot of events going on in this space? I mean, if this evidence with the IP ranges can be taken at face value, the Chinese government itself is running a mining operation. And the security is piss poor, obviously. All of these machines were open public access through the internet. And this really starts to like bring up a lot of questions. Like, there's a lot of conspiracies regularly thrown around from all sides in this ecosystem. You have a lot of the RBTC crowds like throwing accusations at Blockstream about being connected to the Bilderberg group and the Illuminati because of AXA Industries investments in them. You have a lot of people on our side of the fence hurling like accusations at Jihan of being a front for the Chinese government. And when you really start to dig around and look at a lot of circumstantial evidence like this, and then there really is a lot peppered around if you really open your eyes and dig through the hay pile. Like, how much of those accusations are just your typical like loony, like our conspiracy on Reddit nut jobs just throwing out nonsense, and how much have a kernel of truth to them? I mean, like everybody in this space, like we're trying to build the next reserve currency of the world. Like that's our goalpost. We're shooting for the moon. So why are all these speculations about government involvement, about political agendas at a global scale being tied into the space? Why are they so readily dismissed when everybody here is shooting to become a big player on that level. Like, why is it nutty to talk about how these types of groups and organizations would respond to us as we grow, when that's exactly what we're trying to do, grow and displace these kinds of groups and organizations?
I think you're just one of those libertarians in Bitcoin, those crazy libertarians we need to get rid of, Shinobi. Like, you're the problem. It's always the government.
You can pry my node from my cold, dead fingers.
I think a lot of people, like when they get into Bitcoin for the first time, if they're noobs or normies or mainnet people, they kind of look at the crowd and they kind of look at the Bitcoin Talk forum and they think, oh no, this is just a bunch of like those people that think that they're tinfoil hat people. And I don't like associate with these. I don't identify with this politics. This feels wrong to me. And my advice is like, just keep looking, just keep reading. And then after a while, you'll start to kind of wake yourself up in your dreamy sleep. Carl, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I actually talked to the guy that was quoted in the Bleeping Computer article a little bit the other day, because I was trying to do a little bit more research on this, because he's still saying it's a hunch that it's related to the Chinese government, so I'm trying to look into it more to see if I can get a little bit more convincing argument that that's the case. So that's something I'm looking into now. As far as like the kind of Bitcoin political governance issues you're talking about, one thing I've been thinking about lately, even more so than like the centralization of mining, I've been worrying about the centralization of Bitcoin holdings. Like, because if someone else is holding your Bitcoins for you, then you don't, or even if you're not running a full node, then you don't get to have a say in the changes to the consensus rules. So I think the centralization of Bitcoin holdings is almost a bigger issue than mining centralization right now. Because if you, as we're seeing with Coinbase, like Bitcoin Cash forked off and they didn't even get their Bitcoin Cash. So if you were a Bitcoin Cash supporter, or that's something you would like, then like you wouldn't even get a chance to have a say in the matter if you didn't move your coins off the exchange. So if everyone, this kind of gets into SegWit 2x stuff too, if everyone's not running full nodes and letting some companies choose the consensus rules for them, like we've kind of seen with SegWit 2x, then how different is that than a citizen voting for a representative who controls the monetary policy of their national currency?
That's well said.
I mean, like that is 100% on point, Kyle. And like I say this every opportunity I get. Like, as heated as the debate going on in the spaces, it is all happening amongst a tiny minority. How many Twitter polls you show me, how many times you point at the user counts for different forums and Reddit groups, this is all a fight amongst a tiny minority at the top of the majority. And the majority has no idea what's going on. They're not enforcing their own rules. They are not taking sovereign control of their own money. And I think that's ultimately why you see this gets so heated, because this is people trying to speak for those who aren't speaking. It's trying to look at things from the point of view of those who don't know what's going on and try to safeguard their interests. And you have these two groups trying to do that from totally different perspectives. And in my mind, it boils down to an aspect of the incentive structure that people don't really think about, and that's spenders versus hodlers. Like, I am planning on holding Bitcoin until this system either implodes or I die. And validating that myself, having total control over my wealth myself, that is non-negotiable in my mind. That is why I am here. I am not here for a new PayPal. I am not here to buy coffee with Bitcoin. I am here so that my wealth, my savings, is beyond the ability for somebody else to control, to censor, to take away from me. And then you have other users who are coming in here and just trying to treat this like PayPal. and complaining about transactional costs. And ultimately, like what a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of people in that category are doing is throwing their externalities onto me and not acknowledging that. Because yeah, they might be priced out unless we develop second layers from using the main chain to transact, or like a PayPal-like system. But I'm the one who's bearing those costs.
Okay.
I'm the one who's saving my wealth in here and having to subsidize them.
You made a really good point. I just want to let it sink in. So the point is, you don't want your savings to be like censored and diluted. And I feel like that's exactly what came out of the financial crisis. There was a group of people who were financially responsible and looked after their shit. And there was a group of people who were financially reckless and just went to the casino. And then when they lost their bet, turned around and said, oh, can you just give us some of your savings that you worked so hard to look after? And we're trying to create an asset class that resists, like heavily resists those kinds of irresponsibilities that we saw in the financial services, right?
Yes, exactly. And like the most frustrating thing from my point of view is that look at things like Lightning Network, Tumblebit, like fucking side chains, even like custodial things like Coinbase. There are numerous ways to reconcile that externality that I am forced to bear and provide people who are mostly looking for a payment mechanism, a way to do that without negating or making it an insane burden for me to maintain my wealth. And they just ignore it. They refuse to accept it. They go, because this doesn't work in the specific technical way that I wish it would. I don't want it, even though it would let me transact cheaply, even though it would allow me to do so without making it an insane cost for me or people like me to maintain my wealth. They spit at it and they throw it off the table. And why? Like, why? Like, this is the perfect reconciliation of two aspects of the incentive structure that are totally at odds with each other. Now, here's the way to reconcile them. Keep the larger network effect that we're both a part of. And they don't want to. And I really don't understand why.
Well, I don't know. I think a lot of people came into this and they saw something different in the tool. Some people, I think, are acting honestly and sincerely, and they actually do think that this should scale up to be the size of PayPal 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever number we're up to now, or they start making comparisons to Visa, and they genuinely think that is the project that we're engaged on. And who's to say whether or not a tool is a tool? If I invent a tool of some kind, and somebody reappropriates it and starts to use it as a doorstop instead of a paperweight, who am I, like even as the inventor, to tell them that they can't do that? I think the problem is when you have this linked list and it's backed by proof of work and it's got petahashes of mining power, then it becomes a problem, because now you have digital scarcity that comes into play. They can't peacefully go off, take my tool and use it and reappropriate it the way they want to without having a negative impact on some of the people that are using it for its perhaps original intended purpose.
The problem is the code is the law. Like, people always try to make these arguments that they signed a social contract when they first came into Bitcoin, and they wanted to increase the block size. Like Satoshi said that you could do. He didn't say that you should do it, and it was 7 years ago. He said you could raise the block size like that. So, like, if I lost my train of thought.
No,
yeah,
if we want to go down the road of saying code is law, we have to be really, really careful. I mean, first of all, it's a misquote. Like, I think, like, it's not really...
I just remember what I was going to say.
Yeah, go on.
If they didn't sign a social contract, what they did is they joined a network that had the code written as it was, and Satoshi put a 1 megabyte block size limit on it, and that's what everyone agreed to. Whatever they think they agreed to doesn't matter. What agrees is the code that they decided to run at the time. And as we've seen, it's extremely difficult to make changes in a hard forking manner, which is why I don't see why these people that want bigger blocks don't convince more than 50% of miners to add a soft forked increase to the block size, or effective increase to the block size, instead of whining about trying to do a hard fork.
Yeah, exactly. Like the social contract that people opted into was the system as it is. There were no guarantees of any certain changes being made, any specific courses. They opted into what there was. And anything that changes that involves either breaking off into your own social unit with its own contract or convincing everybody that opted into that original contract to change it. It's not just like the vague promises people attribute to it.
It's hilarious to hear libertarians support social contracts too, or voluntarists and anarchists.
Yeah, this industry has definitely weeded out the real libertarians from the fake libertarians. So guys, coming up to like 45 minutes. So I guess we want some kind of outro. Any final thoughts?
Keep your eye open for anything that Kyle writes, and if you've got a link for us, I don't have it on hand, Kyle. He's actually doing a regular mailing list compilation of a lot of news in the space. It's definitely a thing to keep your eye on if you want to keep up to date with what's going on.
Yeah, I'll add that to the description after the show as well. Join us actually in the Bitcoin Mumble afterglow as well, and we can have a deconstruction of what went on. So it's been a long show, so I'm not going to go to the chat, but I have been engaging with you guys. Thanks very much. I will respond to a couple of noteworthy things. First of all, we did not intend to clash with the World Crypto Network tonight. That was purely accidental. I was going to do this a lot earlier, and I had to eat something, and then we, ended up having an extended kind of, pre-show party. So please go and join the World Crypto Network for the Bitcoin group tonight. And also, so you can join Mad Bitcoins on his mad adventure. He's going away. He's got microphones. He's got all his tools, all the things. He's got all the things on his trip to Europe. So please go support him over there. He's a good friend of mine. And, I have many fond memories at the World Crypto Network. So in a way, I think it's pretty good that we've got all these clashing shows, but don't take anything like, we're trying to clash with them. Usually we try to time things up so that you get to watch both at the same time. And anyway, you can just hit play again. Like it's up on the internet forever. Apparently there were like 3 shows on right now in crypto that were all simulcasting at the same time. So I think that's very bullish for this industry. So if you liked what you saw, but remember, only if you want to. Bye-bye for now. Have a good weekend, everyone.